we spend a couple hours at church a week and it's sacred. It's sacred. But what it's supposed to be is the funnel to the rest of life, where through the local church, we're equipped to go be a worker. We're equipped to go be a father. We're equipped to do what I call covenant friendships, which is the kind of friendship which I just described, where you're fully known and fully loved.
Well, hi again, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Narrative Podcast. Mike Andrews here with Aaron Bear, and Aaron, I am prepared. Hit me.
You should be.
I'm ready for my medicine. Tell the people, what's going on
around again.
Why we're doing it.
It was so much fun. We get to record it twice. We had so much fun on the first time, and
yes.
Now we get to. But as we were just saying, like, what's great about this is that it genuinely wasn't me who screwed it up this time. And so it's very clear. I get to just throw everything at you, which is great.
It was genuinely my fault. We did this yesterday afternoon, and
I'm gonna play that clip on repeat.
Well, you won't hear me. I'll tell you that much. You won't hear a thing from my microphone. It sounded like I was a million miles away because I turned the wrong microphone on the board, and I was away from it, not monitoring it. So we had virtually no audio. And we're trying it again because we got to get to the people. We gotta let them hear the good stuff that's going on in the news this week.
Months from now, it's going to come out that I actually just cut your mic because I only wanted them to hear me. That was actually what happened. It was like, they don't need to hear Mike. That's okay.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Well, what we were attempting to talk about yesterday, and we'll talk about today, is we haven't really touched on the government shutdown here on the narrative because we've expected this to come to an end at some point. And we figured as soon as we talk about it, that's the day that they reach an agreement and the government opens back up and it's old news.
It's that simple. It's not the Democrats holding up the government shutdown. It's us not talking about it on the narrative. That's actually
exactly. So we're trying to do our part today to maybe fuel them into action by mentioning it. And by the time this posts and you hear it, perhaps we look foolish for even discussing it, but we're going on a month now, Aaron, of the government not being open. And I know you were in DC last week. So what are you hearing about this shutdown?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's unprecedented in a lot of ways. I really think we could be on the verge of the longest government shutdown in American history. And that it's not because of lack of effort, right? There have been multiple votes every week to reopen the government and multiple attempts to negotiate with Democrats. And every time they vote against it. And this is talking to some friends in Washington, this is a different shutdown than some others in that there's really not a fiscal cliff, like a major devastation that's going to happen if it doesn't reopen soon. So it's just going to be continual hardships. I mean, obviously, everyone's aware of the defunding of SNAP that's going to be coming here soon. The food assistance program, which has multiple problems. SNAP has huge problems of its own, but it is an important program for a lot of families that rely on it. And so it really is a question of political pressure, of what side's going to feel the pressure the most. I think it's important to recognize what the shutdown is about. The Republicans have brought forward basically a continuation of what we're doing right now for funding of the government, right? So there's all of Obamacare is still funded in this, all of their Democrat priorities that they just voted on like 8 to 10 weeks ago, right? The same things that Democrats have supported every time in this form they have voted on, and they're refusing to do it again, primarily over three issues. Number one, a re-expansion of Medicaid to cover illegal immigrants. Number two, refunding of Planned Parenthood. And number three, refunding of gender procedures on kids. Right? These are the things that are at the core of the additional spending they want to add. And you know, they're saying, "Oh no, we're not fighting for health insurance for illegal immigrants." No. I was literally at the White House earlier this week, and a friend of mine who's working over there has covered his walls with mugshots of illegal migrants who committed violent crimes, literal rape, murder, aggravated assault, theft, who we have documentation that they got health insurance. I got health insurance from the government through Medicaid. And this is the dividing line right now. And Republicans have tried everything to try to say, hey, let's just fund the military. Nope. Let's just fund SNAP. Nope. This is the dividing line for the Democrats right now is these additional fundings. And it's going to come down to who's going to blink first, which is frustrating because this is a pretty straightforward continuation bill.
Yeah, I know our boys were a couple weeks ago now curious about what is the shutdown, what's going on. And Vice President Vance had been on CBS Sunday Morning to talk about it and essentially said, we have told the Democrats we're willing to negotiate these things that they want to negotiate, just not part of this spending bill, what was essentially his messaging point. And so I think, and again, I'm a political outsider here. I just kind of follow the news. I have no idea what the inside baseball is, but it sure seems like from my position, they're banking on the fact that Republicans are in power. So they're going to be the ones that bear the brunt of this, so they can hold out and stall and continue to point the finger at Republicans and also try and advance these pet project priorities that actually shouldn't be a priority to keep the government open, to keep benefits flowing to families who need it.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, their play right now is, and from a politics side, you almost see where they're coming from, like what their strategy is. Their strategy is, hey, we're in the minority in both chambers. We don't have the presidency. Let's just create chaos, right? That's what they're looking at. Is like, can we create as much chaos as possible and see what happens? I think the biggest difference right now than we've ever seen in these situations is one, we have a president who is made his name on negotiating deals. And is also one of the most stubborn people you'll ever come across. So he's not going to be easily intimidated on this. But also, too, the mainstream media doesn't have the same grip on the public that they used to have, right? So these types of debates all come down to messaging, right? Like, who can convince the American people that their side is trying to do the right thing and the other side is holding it up. And I think, for the most part, in Washington, I've been really encouraged by what the president and vice president are doing, but even what Speaker Johnson and others continuing to bring these bills forward for votes to say, how about this? Let's try to open this way. Can we agree to this? And it really shows the untenable and unreasonable position Senate Democrats are in right now.
Well, let's move from DC to a story that hits a little closer to home. It's a national story, but certainly has its flashpoint in Ohio. We talked over the summer after a couple of Cleveland Guardians pitchers were suspended for in-game gambling action, essentially. Those prop bets or micro bets that have become so popular, they were accused of essentially collaborating with gamblers, with the sports books, in order to weigh, is this pitch going to be a ball or a strike kind of thing. And then this past week, huge FBI investigation comes out, arrests a couple of NBA coaches, players. There's some ties to the Cleveland Cavaliers there. So there's some deep roots with this sports gambling issue here in Ohio. And it has become a pretty big story and could be one of those linchpin moments to see sports betting rolled back, maybe nationwide and hopefully here in Ohio too.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most predictable outcome. Speaking of betting, the odds were high.
We could bet on
exactly
on it.
that this was going to happen. And I mean, aside from, I will say this story has brought forward some just all-time classic mafia names like Black Tony and Albanian Bruce, and all those jokes aside about. For
anybody who needs a last minute Halloween costume, by the way.
Exactly, right. Albanian Bruce is really flying off the shelves right now. But in all seriousness, though, this is the complete deterioration of sports that we saw coming, right? And the reality of this is, with how many opportunities there are to bet, it is completely unenforceable, right? Mm-hmm. And this is my frustration with even the way this has been covered out of the gate. Is you're seeing these sports companies, whether it's ESPN or, like, a lot of times I'll read The Ringer or things like that, trying to be like, yeah, this is terrible, But thank God there's DraftKings and FanDuel and all these other companies. They're catching this stuff, and they're catching some things, right? Yeah, if someone's placed at a $50,000 bet on Terry Rozier, this sort of backbencher point guard, they're placing big bets on his under of points or minutes scored. Yeah, that's very obvious. It's going to be really easy for the AI and FanDuel or DraftKings to like, hey, that's a weird bet. But there's so many, like when you have the opportunity to bet on so many things, it's almost impossible to be able to catch, hey, is there something fishy going on here? And it's not in their interest to flag all of these times that it's happening, right? It's in their interest to catch the big ones and say, look, we're being responsible here. But it reminds me of, the problems we always have with the laws that require children who are born alive after a botched abortion have ongoing life-sustaining care, right? The problem with enforcing those laws is the only people that are involved in enforcing them that could actually tell that this thing happened were the people who committed the crime, right? Yeah. So, like, you're expecting DraftKings and FanDuel to be like, yeah, actually, we see a lot of fishy things going on. And of course, the media doesn't want to take it to DraftKings or FanDuel because they're sponsoring these guys, right? As soon as SportsCenter cuts to commercial, the first thing you see is FanDuel or DraftKings or whatever. It reminds me just like when we were in the throes of COVID, and here was CNN saying, "Oh, if you get the vax, you can't get it. You can't spread. You can't spread the disease. It's the miracle cure." And anybody who says otherwise is a knuckle dragger. And sure enough, what's the first commercial when they cut to commercial? Is brought to you by Pfizer. It's so corrupt and so gross, and it's ruining sports and having a massive impact on kids in the next generation.
Yeah, and it's not even that they're advertising during these broadcasts of, highlights or in-game. We actually have Bally's Sports. That's one of the major regional sports networks in the country. And at least here locally, I know the day after Emmanuel Clase, who was one of the Cleveland Guardians pitchers who was suspended for this, the next game, they're presenting the starting lineup on the broadcast, and it's brought to you by Bet365.
Right, exactly.
Like they're actively sponsoring these sports teams and the networks.
ESPN has their own. It's ESPN Bet. They have their own platform on these things, right? Like they're all cashing in on this now, and it's again, this is just the tip of what we're seeing here, right? So now even when I'm watching games with my wife, and something weird happens in a game, her mind automatically goes to, oh, somebody's on the take there.
Yeah, you can't trust the integrity of the game anymore.
Yeah. Oh, they missed a 35-yard field goal. Oh, well, somebody took the under. And you can't help but let your mind go there. And I will say too, this is beyond just the integrity of the game and the way we can't really trust what we're seeing there as much anymore. The Chauncey Billups piece of this really stands out to me because Chauncey Billups was one of the most respected former NBA players. He had made tens of millions of dollars throughout his career. He was one of the people that had one of the 30 most coveted jobs in America as an NBA coach, right? Mm-hmm. And here is this guy taking $50,000, like getting paid $50,000 by the mob to be involved in illegal poker games in Vegas, right? That's not a rational decision to make. Right? You only do that if you're an addict, right? You only are involved in this kind of stuff if there is something really something messed up, right? And having that addiction going on to completely risk ruining your life for a guy who's made that much money is really not that much is completely nonsensical. And this is the way you see these things destroy lives. And then there was that Free Press article on the isolation side of this that I think is really big. There's just so much there that you see how sports betting is just tearing lives apart.
Yeah, the isolation piece I think is key here, because there are those product issues of being able to trust what you're seeing with your eyes that as a sports fan is really hard, but at the same time it makes the good side of sports, the communal aspect of sports, harder, because we've talked about our and joked about our fantasy football league here
Right.
on the podcast. Like, that's a way that we have fun, that we engage with a game, and kind of add some banter to our
Right.
office life and to our
Yeah, with
relationship.
other people, right? Yeah, we're
Right.
doing it. And Sarah and Shar want to say that they're winning, but the season's only half over, right? We wanted to let it
Mid-season
was
trophy.
it was not going to be a fun season for them if we did this together and they were just losing the whole time and they wouldn't play again next year. So we're doing it all, we'll
Yeah,
let them
that's it.
play and then we'll
That's
see.
it. That's it. But it becomes harder when you've got something riding on the game, or major stakes, where you kind of internalize, or you don't want to be around people because you're going to be stressed out during the whole game, and you lose opportunities for connection even in that.
Well, that's one of those things that there was this really good Free Press article on that talked about how sports betting, more so than anything else, has created such isolation in America today, especially around young men. Again, think about when even things like fantasy football, which have been around 20 plus years, almost 30 years now, like you do that with friends, you're all together, that kind of thing, right? Whereas sports betting is a really isolating experience, is what the data is showing, especially when you're doing these in-game prop bets. And actually, in this Free Press story that just came out, there's data that's showing that people are doing the sports betting increasingly on their own. So they're consuming sports, especially young men are consuming sports alone, as opposed to sports are typically a communal experience. I remember when Maria and I graduated from OU. That was back when OU was on quarter, so we graduated later, like in first week of June. And I moved out to Phoenix right away to start working. And then 3 months later, flew back to Ohio. Maria and I got married, and then she moved out to Phoenix with me. But when we first moved out to Phoenix, we knew nobody, especially when I was out there on my own, knew nobody at all. And the way I got to know guys, the way I built community, like if I met guys in church or whatever, it'd be like, hey, let's go watch the game together, right? We'd go to a bar and watch the Cubs or watch whatever. We go to a Dodgers game, and we just had it was a ton of fun. But it was the way we built relationships, and for men especially, that's one of the ways they build relationships. And this is one more thing, like video games, like porn, that's driving men apart from one another. That's isolating men more and more. And the data is showing that this is the effect sports betting is having, where it's no longer a communal experience that you're cheering for teams together. It's not like me and the guy next to me are rooting for the team together. It's now we're all placing bets on random people and random games on random sports that we know nothing about, but we're hoping to make a buck. Or dig ourselves out of a hole that we put ourselves into from earlier bets. It really is, again, just going back to where we started, Mike, this is the most logical outcome. This is what we saw coming. And lawmakers today can't say they weren't warned, and they can't allow the sports betting companies to act like, well, we'll just pull back a little bit. I am totally convinced this has been a part. When we say we saw this coming, I'm sure FanDuel and DraftKings and Bet365 and all these guys, they saw this coming too. So they overreached massively on purpose, knowing that at some point there was going to be the pushback, and they could say, all right, we'll be the reasonable ones, and we won't let people bet on pitch by pitch anymore. We agree. That's a little bit too far. Maybe we're not going to let people bet the unders on certain amount of minutes played or points scored. So there can't be incentives to do worse. But again, that's all just trying to mask the bigger systematic problems with sports betting and addiction that says this just should not be a part of the American sport experience today.
And it actually ties in very well to our interview today. We're talking with Justin Whitmel Earley, who actually has a new book that just came out this week, but we wanted to talk with him about a new podcast he has called Intentional Fatherhood. And he really deals a lot with this particular issue of isolation. He wants to encourage men to find deep, authentic community, because being a dad is hard. Being a husband is hard. And he's got some great resources and is having great conversations around this issue. It's one that we've identified through the Hope in a Future report that's really important for the state of Ohio and for the state of families. And so I wanted to bring him on and have this conversation. And we've got it for you next here on The Narrative.
Hey, Narrative listeners. You know, Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we're back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, David Mahan, and Chris Lightfoot joining us today as we get to talk with Justin Whitmel Earley, who's a lawyer, author, and speaker from Richmond, Virginia, where he lives with his wife, Lauren, and their 4 sons. He's the author of The Common Rule, Habits of the Household, Made for People, The Body Teaches the Soul, and a new children's book, The Big Mess. He regularly speaks on the topics of spiritual formation, technology, mental health, and family rhythms. And we're grateful for this opportunity to welcome you to The Narrative today, Justin. Thanks for being here.
You're very, very welcome. I love what you all are doing. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you so much. I wanted to reach out because, I've followed your work for a while now. I mentioned as we were getting started here that Common Rule and Habits of the Household are 2 books that my wife and I have digested for our families, and saw that you were doing this new work through the Intentional Fatherhood podcast. And it seemed to overlap with a lot of what we've been talking about at CCV with the Hope in a Future report and the importance of fathers in families and in households. So would love to hear more about your heart behind starting the podcast and what you hope to accomplish through it.
Oh, yes. I would love to tell you. I started writing about habits and spiritual formation in my mid-30s, and very quickly realized that a central feature of habits in this stage was paying attention to my habits of parenting and all the ordinary things that I did in the household that were different than what I would like to do if I actually carefully thought about them. And a lot of my writing is about that difference between what we think in our head and what we do in our habits, and how the habits actually form far more of our life than we think. And by no means should we abandon the head and good education and worldview, but we should definitely not ignore formation, practice, and habits. So I've been writing about that in my second book, Habits of the Household, and have just been so happy that the Lord has seen fit to bless that with a large audience. It's been just a joy, because I was writing the Habits of the Household in March of 2020. So when the world was falling apart, and I'm, for anybody listening, I am bivocational. So I'm a business lawyer, just got out of a legal meeting before I walked on to record here. And I run a law practice, and I remember thinking in 2020, like, why am I writing about parenting? I don't even know what I'm doing in parenting. Like, I'm a father of, at that time it was 4 boys aged 2 months, 2 years, 4 and 6. Now they're 7, 8, 11, and 13. But I just had so much insecurity about what I was doing and talking about. And yet the Lord has really used that in-process thoughts that you get in Habits of the Household to help a lot of other parents. But Mike, overwhelmingly, that audience is mothers. So, which is great, okay? Because great wives and great mothers tell their husbands and their children what to read and what to listen to. And, they're just, if you can get the ears of a mom, in many ways, you have the ears of a family, in many ways. So I've just loved that. But one of the things that I hear from moms all the time is, how can I get my husband on board with this? And I thought, man, I would really like to find a way to start trying to speak directly to fathers. And providentially, now a great friend, then it was just a guy I met only a year ago. This wonderful guy named Brooke Moser, who runs a ministry called Intentional out of the Northwest. So they're in Oregon, and they run a ministry called Intentional. And we decided to partner to do a podcast for fathers. and talking really at the idea of intentionality in fatherhood, about choosing your habits carefully, thinking about your stage of life, thinking about what's going on, and the unique challenges that it is to be a father. It's unlike being a mother, but we need both so badly. And so I wanted to keep talking to mothers and habits of the household. And wonderfully, a lot of fathers read too. But I want to do something specific to talk to men and fathers about raising children. And so that's what the Intentional Fatherhood podcast is all about. We're only 2 seasons in, and season 2 is still in process as we speak now. We've recorded it all, but it's releasing. And it's been tremendous. It's been so much fun. I'm so glad that you're listening, Mike.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, grateful for all the work that you've done. I'm curious, here in season 2 of the podcast, what type of feedback are you getting from dads that are listening, and what are some of the maybe most responded to topics that you're covering, or areas that guys feel like they're really benefiting from the conversations you're having on that podcast?
One of the things that we try to be really clear about in Intentional Fatherhood is the difficulties that you encounter in being a father, and being honest and vulnerable about how hard it is and how much we actually struggle with ourselves and our fathering, our being a husband. And so I think one of the hallmark responses that we get is, oh, thank you for being honest. I am all for, in one sense, the rah, beat your chest, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get down to the hard work, do the thing part of being a man. Like, depending on where a man is, I will challenge him. I have 4 sons. Like, I challenge them. But there's another part to being a man, which is often overlooked. And that is to be honest about your failings, ask for help, be vulnerable and open in such a way that creates male friendships. And one of the things we're trying to do in Intentional Fatherhood is speak in a way that allows fathers to admit failing, recognize weakness, and get help. Most often that help is going to be friendship within the local church. Sometimes that help is therapy. Sometimes that help is just talking to their wives more clearly about what's going on in their life. But I would just say one of the hallmark responses we get is thank you for being honest. And that's one of the things we want to continue to do. We want to be honest about the addictions, the struggles, the mental health failures that we have had in our past and that we're still working on. And they're the kinds of things that you would expect that most fathers are struggling with. A lot of fathers struggle mightily still with lust and pornography, with indulgence and addiction, with laziness or overwork, with keeping secrets instead of living vulnerably into friendship. And we want to really address those things and call you higher, but also call you to that low road of Christ who is humble, who's full of humility and full of honesty.
Just on the track that you're on right now, I got in early this morning to get some work done. Like, these guys would not understand, but
I got here at 10:30, man.
But I've been hearing about Tony Evans a lot in the media, and him going through his process. And then I just saw on my feed that he just recently was restored, right? And so didn't become the pastor again, but he was restored in this 1-year process of restoration. And it, man, I watched it on 2 times, but it blessed me to, I don't know if you saw this, guys, but if you haven't, you have to see this. It was an actual service where the whole thing was about him being restored, and his family praying for him, and his sons blessing him, and they were weeping. And, he was giving his testimony about how even he had to have some mentorship and how they walked with him through this process of restoration. It caught me off guard this morning, because I think it spoke to the role of the church, not just to condemn sin, but to restore ones, who have fallen. And that work of restoration, I think if that was something that we would hear more in the body, see how it was played out in his ministry.
Yes.
It was so powerful. But your comments there just made me think about that.
That's so deeply encouraging. I don't know the Tony Evans story. I am aware that his church is doing this restoration process, which is which is beautiful. I'll just say two things. One, I think about this a lot as a father with our children. I talk a lot about discipline because it's one of the things that I struggle with and most dads struggle with, either being too passive and not addressing what's going on with your children. Some people struggle with that. I don't. I struggle with being too aggressive and yelling too much, trying to control too much. And one of the things I try to remind dads of, because it comes out of my struggle, is that the goal of discipline is not behavior control. It is heart discipleship, which means that it's about more than just getting your child to say, I'm sorry, I won't do that again. It's about restoration. It's about saying after, whether we're talking about a toddler, who's not listening, or an adolescent who's struggling, the goal of any conversation and discipline and intervention is to restore that child into a loving relationship with you, which doesn't work really well if all you're doing is yelling and correcting. You need to be thinking about, how am I bringing this child back into the loving arms of a father? Because literally in the family, that's what you're hoping for. And theologically in the story, the grand story of creation, that's what we're hoping for. Like God disciplines those he loves, which means he's always restoring us. I mean, sin is not a surprise for him. It's not a surprise that we find sin in the lives of pastors, human beings, fathers, sons, everything. What's surprising is when people are actually doing the work of reconciliation and restoration, which it's beautiful. And the second thing I would say there is another thing that I love talking about, because it's also so important in my life, is being someone who lives without secrets. I think fathers, ministry leaders, business leaders, everybody, we are the most prone to this, I think, to think what we're doing is so important that certain things can be ignored in the process. And we see too many leaders, too many politicians, too many ministry leaders failing, stepping down, losing their ministry because of something that was going on in their life but went undisclosed. And thus a little foothold for the enemy became a huge moral failing. And I am a sinner just like you all, just like Tony Evans, just like anyone else who walked the earth, save Jesus Christ. And the commonality of being a father and a leader is that we have problems in our life. But what I want to see is a generation of fathers who walk closely with other male friends, who know them fully, know everything about their life, and love them anyway. That idea, to be fully known and yet at the same time fully loved, is what Jesus does for us. He knows all our failings and is always trying to love and restore us anyway. So my point is, if that's true theologically, that should be true also in practice in our friendships. Like every man should have at least one other guy who knows them fully and loves them anyway, so that we are protected, held, and constantly restored by friendship. And so one of the big things I'm talking to fathers about, and you'll hear this in the Intentional Fatherhood podcast, is find male friendships, find male friendships, find male friendships.
Justin, I'm going to jump in on that because you just mentioned that ideally they're finding those male friendships in and through the local church,
yes,
community, in that body of believers. One of the things we've been talking about a lot around the office with the advent of this Hope in the Future report and some of the things that we're doing with Communio and trying to help churches, give them the tools and resources to launch intentional parent-family relationship ministries, marriage ministries. We've recognized that a lot of churches, I think Communio's number is like 85% of churches don't spend any money on marriage and family ministry. It's just not in their budget. It's not really part of the consideration. So what are you finding as you're diving into this space? What would you say churches really could be leaning into more? What would you love to see the local church doing around fatherhood?
Wow, that's so interesting. I probably have a skewed perspective, Chris, because I get invited to speak at tons of churches, and I love it because it's some family ministry has encouraged everybody to read my book, and I speak at a lot of churches about friendship. What I just talked about, my book Made for People, is all about that. So I come from a perspective where I'm seeing all these churches that are doing it,
yeah,
and I'm thinking, oh wow. if the majority of churches, which is the ones I don't see because I only go to some, such a thin sliver, are not doing this, then that's shocking. That's startling because, we spend a couple hours at church a week and it's sacred. It's sacred. But what it's supposed to be is the funnel to the rest of life, where through the local church, we're equipped to go be a worker. We're equipped to go be a father. We're equipped to do what I call covenant friendships, which is the kind of friendship which I just described, where you're fully known and fully loved. And I think often churches can think in terms of a funnel where they're looking, and listeners can't see the screen right now, but I'm making like a downward triangle, a funnel, where at the top they're seeing all the people they might be able to get the attention of, and they want to pull them all to a church event, maybe their Sunday service, right? Like get attendance, get people in the building, hear a sermon. And I'm for that. I'm for that. But I think the more important thing to think about is that second funnel, which is the people at your church. Look at them and ask, are you funneling them down into intimate relationships with a small group, or a Bible study, or an accountability group, or a covenant friendship within the congregation? Because that is where lives are really changed in relationship within the church. Otherwise, we could just podcast a sermon, right? Like anybody can do that, but that's not what church is. Church is not just hearing the word preached. It is putting it into practice in the community of believers. And so some of the ways that I see that, and I would want to see that happening, are churches that are working on equipping their people for fatherhood, for friendship, for work. And those are, those can be as simple as equipping with resources. Like I hear this all the time. A group in our church read your book, Habits of the Household, and now the dads are meeting and talking about, X, Y, and Z. And Brooke and I talk about this on the Intentional Fatherhood podcast. One of our great dreams is that people would get it out of their car and into a hangout and say, let's listen to this podcast together and talk about what we've heard. I think churches who think in those terms are going to be doing incredible things, because they're thinking about sending their people out. They're fundamentally thinking outward, like not like what's happening here in the church building, but they're thinking that the church is to send people out in the world to share the gospel, to raise families, to do the great work of holy vocations, which is things like lawyering and being an electrician and contracting houses and all the work that makes the beautiful world that God made run. So I'm just not in the place of, I can't tell you exactly how to do this, but I can tell you, well, that's how you should think. And each church is going to figure out their own ministry, but they've got to be thinking about, how are we equipping people for the work in the world they're doing as fathers?
That's good. That's good.
I'm curious, Justin. I know this is just going to be very much an opinion, not necessarily an expert or overly provable thing. But
I'm happy to pretend I'm an expert. Go shoot. Yeah.
Well, David does it every day.
And he knows he worked in Prague twice now. He sounds like an here early. He is not.
But in terms of the barrier to this intentionality with men, whether it's toward their wives, toward their children, toward their friendships, is it just like lies of the enemy that we're believing that are keeping us from taking those steps? Is there something that's more tangible than that, that's acting as a barrier to really living an intentional life in all these different spheres that the Lord's called us to?
So don't just think about the head, also think about the habit. That's one division I talk about a lot. Don't just think about the internal heart, but also thinking about the external pressures of the world. This is another division. Don't just think about the spiritual, also think about the physical, because the God who made us is pretty obsessed with the world that he made. He loves it. He loves your body. He made you with one on purpose. And so when I think about this question, Mike, I'm thinking about both realities being very true realities, neither. So on the one hand, you absolutely have the internal spiritual warfare that is lies from the enemy. And that would be anything from the internal narrative, the voice you hear in your head, the shame you feel as a father with the sin that you're dealing with, that tells you I got to get this together before I can let anyone else in on it. This is the voice of the enemy in the garden to Eve. Like what the enemy loves to do is pull us aside, isolate us from anyone else, and whisper in our ear, maybe God didn't actually mean that I fully love you. You need to clean up your behavior before you can really be honest with your friends. This is true. This is a huge deal. We got that has to be fought through Scripture, through the Word, through the preaching of the Word. And in the midst of our sin and shame, we can come and talk to other people. But also, because the second part, there's also just a exterior structure of life problem that is unique to our moment in the modern Western world. We now work generally out of the home rather than in it. This is unlike a lot of human history. We generally travel to go to church rather than go to our, immediate neighborhood church that everybody could walk to, which is unlike most of human history. We now spend inordinate amount of times in our cars, listening to other people across the nation and across the world instead of on porches around fires. This is unique in most of all of human history. There's a reason that the Western world is struggling with a documented physical epidemic of loneliness, where we are funneled into individualistic lives. And so while that spiritual work of preaching the gospel to ourselves and hearing it preached in the local church and reminding us that we need other people and it's okay to confess, also has to be countered with some exterior habits and practices to fight against the norm of an individualistic modern life. And tons of directions we could take this conversation in. But what I like to say to people as low-hanging fruit is you need to find a gathering of other men, and you need to show up, speak up, and come back. And this could happen in so many modes, okay? This could be a running group, right? Where you're saying, I'm not going to live my whole life alone. Like, I'm going to actually show up to a community of guys who are taking runs together, show up, but also like speak up, like as in after the run, do a coffee and then come back, like create a rhythm in your life where you're going into community. This would be really great if you did it in a men's group or an accountability group or in a Bible study where you actually show up, you speak up, and you come back. And when I say speak up, I mean the kind of speaking up that is honest. Like some men do show up and they do come back, but they never speak up. Some men show up and speak up, but they never come back. They drop in and they talk about something, then they're always leaving. They're moving to the next thing. The current of American life is to become busier, wealthier people who used to have friends, period. Like if you don't create countercurrents in your life through intentional practices, you will become a busier, probably wealthier, though, who knows? You'll have more obligations, more things, but you will be totally isolated and totally alone. And I say that current metaphor because I'm like, you have to envision your life as swimming upstream and fighting for areas of community. So literally look at your weekly schedule and ask, is there a gathering of men that I can show up to, speak up in, and come back to week after week? It actually just 1 hour a week changes everything if you're honest. And there's interesting stats on this. It takes hundreds of hours to build a close relationship, like an infeasible amount of hours that anybody would ever have. It takes so many hours unless the studies show you have an unusual amount of vulnerability. In that case, it's very few hours. And so 1 hour a week where you show up and you speak honestly about your life changes the world. And that's, I think, what men need most in our individualistic modern culture.
It's interesting, as Chris was asking questions about, his work, in the Church Ambassador Network, and you were saying, someone who does a lot of work in churches as well, that your perspective was even different than his, both of you doing a lot of work in the church. I would ask a question. When you speak of fatherhood and you're dealing with audiences around fatherhood, what percentage of those fathers are also husbands?
Overwhelming majority, because there's a same sample selection problem where I'm getting invited to speak in churches who have a ministry going, and the people who are showing up or care enough to be doing the work of getting their lives together. So overwhelmingly, I'm meeting married husbands who are also fathers in a church where the ministry is happening, which means there's a vast majority of the world I'm not talking to, single fathers, absentee fathers.
Yeah. And kind of that, I know that sounds like a weird question to a lot of the listeners, but that's part of the issues that I'm seeing from my perspective as working in the secular environments here of public policy.
Yes.
Most of the time you hear father, you are not assuming husbands. I mean, the vast majority of the time. We have an entire Ohio commission on fatherhood and not one mention of husband or marriage on that website.
Wow.
And I think if more churches knew that the vast majority of the people they're trying to reach have no concept of marriage, or when they hear words like fatherhood and this innate, value that we see in fatherhood, a lot of people who hear fatherhood do not automatically think husband or marriage. And I think that's a part of, one of Chris's challenges as he's working with the Church Ambassador Network and our community, Hope in the Future, initiatives. It's getting our different groups to see a little bit outside of the box and say, hey, we have to clearly define these terms unless we want to just speak to the people who are in.
Yeah, it's not all inside baseball.
That's right.
To think it is.
That's right. And
It reminds me, I was meeting with a great friend here in Richmond the other day who grew up with a single mom. He did so well. He went from, being in a low income family, single mom to he's just an incredible guy now. Played college football, leads school and businesses now. I'm keeping it vague because he's got his own story. But he was telling me about his dad, who had a lot of issues. The kinds of things that you expect around substances and being absentee, and sometimes being abusive or overbearing. And he said, the crazy thing, Justin, is that, he would come to my sports games every once in a while, and he would come by, the house at holidays and occasionally and all those things. And he goes, Justin, the crazy thing is he thought he was doing a good job. Like he never even knew his dad. His dad was an alcoholic, never even saw him. And so he thought he was doing a good job. And my friend's, life since has been trying to minister to his father, and try to help him as he's become an adult to know the Lord. And it just struck me as oh my gosh, what a different context, what a different life. And I don't know what to do about. I say we can at least name it and lament it. And that would mean what you just said, David, naming the fact that there's a vast amount of fathers in America who are absentee, are not married, don't even know what this might even look like, because it is lamentable that we live in a moment of modern society where that's the norm. That's totally possible. And in so many communities, the rare thing is to have a father that sticks around, even more rare that stays married to your mom. And this, I think, is where we're talking about public policy, because we're talking about how have we created a culture and a society that's made that so possible and normal. I'm a lawyer. I got my dad was in politics. My brother's in politics now. So there's a whole side of me that doesn't write about it, but thinks about it, because, I don't want to get killed and lambasted and canceled for talking about politics, because it's so hard right now.
It's really fun.
But I bet. But I think about it a lot, because I think about if we make it easy and possible to live in neighborhoods, communities, and societies where being a father is either disincentivized or it's made really easy to leave your family and your kids, no wonder we have the problems that we do. I often think about this utopian vision of if you could snap your fingers and say fathers would stick around, they'd stay married, and they'd stay with their kids. The amount of public policy issues that would be instantly solved is absurd. I mean, the idea of like monogamy, the amount of sexual transmitted disease and abuses would instantly go away. The amount of poverty and crime, the amount of kids that would be finishing their degrees because a father stayed. Like, fathers sticking around in marriages and families changes most of government's problems. And so it sort of makes sense that if we want to figure out how to build a more, you don't even have to be Christian to agree with this. If you just want to figure out how do you build a flourishing society, you create men who stick around. How to do that is a really hard question. But we know that's we might not know how to do it, but we should certainly be able to agree, though, that's what we need to do.
Yeah. Well, Justin, in that summary and overview you just gave us there, I think I hear the heart behind your podcast and why you're reaching out to fathers through this Intentional Fatherhood podcast, but then ultimately what the effect could be, right? Mm-hmm. Is that a fair assessment? Like, if you can help men raise their game up to this level, the level of change that's possible culturally and in communities is almost unlimited.
I am obsessed with small changes that have enormous impact. So that one of the reasons I talk about habits is because there's a psychological feature to human life called keystone habits, where when you do something like start exercising, and this is in my most recent book, The Body Teaches the Soul, I've gotten really interested in how much physical habits shape our spiritual lives. But everybody knows, any psychologist you talk to would say, there are things like exercise, which are keystone habits, where studies will show when you start exercising, all these other changes in your life start to happen. So it's not easy to start exercising. But if you just do this one rhythm, people naturally start sleeping better, eating better, showing up at work more on time. They start smoking less. They even pay back their credit cards more. Like, it's the amount of things that happen when you do that one thing. And we call that a keystone habit. So in a lot of my writings, I'm trying to ask, what would the one small change be in your daily routine that would yield enormous impact? So I talk about a habit of scripture before phone over and over and over, because I'm like, oh, if you did this one thing of saying, I'm going to spend 5 minutes in scripture before I open my phone in the morning, and I'm a living testimony of this, amazing, like, things change in your work life and your family life. And the reason I'm saying that, Mike, is because that theory works culturally as well. There are some things where it's like you zoom in on this problem and you solve all the other problems. If you can get a dad to stick around, you solve most of society's problems. If you can get a dad to be sexually faithful to just his wife, you solve so many problems of crime, abuse, and trauma in the world. If you can get a dad to be authoritative and gentle with his children, you solve so many mental health problems. All of these things over and over are going through fathers. If you can raise healthy men, school shootings vanish. I mean, it's always men. It's always young men who are alone on the internet, and encountering really dark, really strange things. And so I think about over and over, it's like, oh my gosh, so many of the things that we struggle with in the world, whether it's violence, sexual abuse, trauma, mental unhealth, run through healthy fathers. And that should be seen as the keystone talking point if we want to create a flourishing society. And again, this is where we can lock arms with anybody who just understands the world. They don't have to be a believer. We should be able to say, this is a common grace. This is a good thing. Just like exercises change the rest of your life, fatherhood changes the rest of the world. And if you talk to fathers, you're talking about generational impact.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, grateful for the time today, Justin. This has been a great conversation to have with you. Grateful for all of your work. Leave us with a plug for the podcast and where our listeners can find your work.
Yeah, a couple ways that you could dive into this is, one, to go to my website, justinwhitmelearley.com, and on the spelling, just Google Justin, author, lawyer, Earley. You'll find it. I got an email list there that people can follow along with, totally free, lots of ideas. From there, you'll also find the Intentional Fatherhood podcast, which is, if you're at all interested in what we're talking about, then start listening there. And any of those will funnel you to any of my books where it's like, I like the friendship stuff. You go look up Made for People. If you're like, wait, how does exercise change our spirituality? Body Teaches the Soul is going to be a great friend for you. If you're like, well, I really want Habits in the Household. I got Habits in the Household. I've been cranking it out over here, trying to get, fathers resources for all areas of their life. And so I'd be honored to have you read along or follow the email list or listen along.
Well, thanks so much, Justin. And we're grateful to have you here today on The Narrative.
Thank you so much. Y'all are great.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Bear, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.